Good morning. Welcome. Please be seated. We're about to take off.
We just heard the song Flying Home by Lionel Hampton, which Dr. Cecil Brown alerted me to. And it's got a very particular story to it. And maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about that story. What does Flying Home mean?
Oh, the story of Flying Home captures the dual feeling that Afro-Americans had during World War II. It signaled the double victory, the victory against Hitler and the victory at home against racism. And the song itself was composed, I think it was composed by Lionel Hampton, but it was made really famous by Lionel Hampton. And became kind of a symbol as, of black people fighting during World War II around the 40s, 50s. So if you were away in battle, one way to communicate is to listen and play this song, Flying Home.
Thank you. So this is a very remarkable occasion. We'd like to mention that Swinging and Flowing Inclusion is a conference that's funded by the Department of African American Studies and by Charles Henry, and by Citrus and by Citrus's Data and Democracy Initiative. And the impetus of the conference was to create a space in which the question of inclusion can be discussed, and the question of inclusion in new media. Who is being served by new media? Who is taking advantage of new media? What kind of new structures do we have for producing new kinds of democracies, new kinds of justices? And are we really aware of the questions that are involved in those situations, or are we glossing over them and saying, oh, technology will solve everything? And rather than glossing over it, here we are trying to ask specifically what tools will advance us. To that effect, we have 3 keynote speakers and 3 panels. And the first keynote speaker is going to be Anna Everett, speaking about racing across the digital divide. Anna Everett is already here, seated. Then the next panel is going to be Emperor Ain't Got No Clothes, which Dr. Cecil Brown is going to introduce. You want to say something about that?
Oh, yeah. I was just looking at my title, Emperor Ain't Got No Clothes. That's not exactly what Marshall McLuhan said. I think Marshall McLuhan said Emperor's New Clothes. But I added something there, a little vernacular. And the colleague who's going to be on the panel with me start off his talk saying that Cecil didn't get it right. He misquoted McLuhan, but it's a good thing because we'll get into that. The basic to this conversation we're going to have is the idea of oral culture. I'm really thankful for Greg. I spent 3 or 4 years in Berlin, and I shouldn't have done that in one sense, but I did learn German. I did get an idea of how Europeans think, and it kind of holds me in good stead because when I met Greg, I had kind of a background. And he's interested, too, that because he is out from another country, it's easier to negotiate with him. Most white American scholars just freeze up, when you start talking about oral traditions, and because nobody wants to really get into that, it seems. So to make a long story short, I want to personally thank Greg for being so open and providing the funds and just really hanging in there, even when I would become, really angry about certain things we're doing. Just really a wonderful person, and so I'm thankful for that he's able to help me realize some of this connection between oral cultures and digital culture. So, thank you.
That is very generous. Thank you. I likewise would like to thank you for alerting me to things that we can't do without, things that we need to solve, problems we need to solve. And you've pointed out many times that those who ignore problems will be affected negatively by them. The life you save may be your own is a quote that I think about a lot when we speak about these things. We really need to make sure that we construct an environment in which people get their voice and get their space and get their tools in order to create a more just society. So you're pushing for that, and you're not letting me be comfortable ever. And I want you to thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for me not being too comfortable ever. And anybody shouldn't be comfortable and always should ask, how can we move one step further and make it a little bit better? And so that's why we're here today, to be a little bit uncomfortable maybe, but to be awake and to be alert and to pay attention. So, good. So now, briefly, I want to introduce Helen Milner is going to speak about inclusion and diaspora. She's joining us from the UK and has founded UK Online Centres, a situation of 4,000 centres that are created to provide public access to new media at no cost, which is remarkable. I wish the U.S. had a Ministry of Inclusion as well, which it doesn't. But Britain does have a Ministry of Inclusion, which is remarkable. I also understand you have a Ministry of Funny Walks, so there's a range of things that that are going on there. But this is very important, the Ministry of Inclusion, and we're really glad to have you here. And of course, tonight at 5 o'clock we have DJ Spooky, who's flying home to us right now, as it were. And he's in the air, and he's going to land at 2 o'clock and join us at 5 o'clock for the presentation about the Book of Ice, which really talks about territory and alternative modes of thinking about land away from private property, which has done so much damage to the sense of public good. So he's going to try and articulate alternatives to private property that produce more public good.
I'll say one thing about Tracy. We're going to have at the end of that Tracy Barlow, who is
that's right.
professor and practitioner of an exquisite art form, which is Lindy Hop, and its relationship to other black dances. And to kind of underline the idea that technology has a rhythm and dance and those things that are nonverbal play a large part in slowing us down, because we're going so fast. In every generation, some technology speeds up things so fast that it's incumbent upon the Afro-American tradition to slow us down, put it into rhythm, and so forth. So swinging and flowing is going to be underlined by Tracy Barlow's work at the end of G.J. Spooker's presentation.
So we're going to end with a dance, right?
End with the dance.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's kind of like a wedding, which is interesting. The few things I have to tell you is I wanted to thank Dr. Paul Wright, who's the director of Citrus, for funding Data and Democracy Initiative. I'm very grateful for that support. And I also wanted to point out that there are restrooms to the right out the door and back down the hallway. If you need to use what we call bio breaks here, then the bio breaks happen back there. And we should also mention that there's no coffee in the auditorium. There's lots of coffee outside. You can bring water in here, but no coffee, because the coffee stains the carpet. You can bring food in, however, so lunch will be served here as well. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ashley Farrow-Murray, who is going to introduce Anna Everett. So thank you for coming, and let's have a great day together.
Good morning. It's always a little tricky to be at this podium with there we go. Thank you. This is excellent. Good morning. So I guess we're going to end with a dance, and I think we might be starting with a little bit of a dance as well. My name is Ashley. I'm a graduate student here at Berkeley in the Performance Studies program, and I'm a dance scholar and practitioner, so I'm excited to hear what Professor Everett has to say. I saw a little sneak preview of her PowerPoint, and I can't wait to see what's in store for us. But before we get there, I want to give a brief introduction. So I'm really looking forward to participating in discussions with you all today, and I'm especially thrilled for this opportunity to introduce Professor Anna Everett, a woman who has made and who continues to make intellectual space for so many of us to pursue work on race and digital culture. Professor Everett's impressive oeuvre has opened assumptions about universalist technologies and the privileged subjects who might use them to critical discussions on race, gender, and the digital divide. In her work, Professor Everett has transformed the academic assumptions surrounding the usability of technological devices. Professor Anna Everett is the chair of the Department of Film Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. During her tenure at Santa Barbara, Professor Everett has served as the director of the Center for Black Studies and held a visiting professorship at the University of the Center Faculty of Letters and Humanities in Tunisia. In her duties as chair and professor, Professor Everett has also organized incredible conferences that add to generative dialogue on race and new media. Such conferences include the important Race in Digital Space 2.0 conference. Professor Everett's book projects include Returning the Gaze, A Genealogy of Black Film Criticism, and Digital Diaspora, A Race for Cyberspace. She is also currently the editor of PMLA and Screening Noir, Journal of Black Film, TV, and New Media Culture. Professor Everett has received countless fellowships, grants, and honors for her scholarship in TV history and theory, African American film and culture, and digital media technologies. To name a few, she has received the prestigious Harold J. Plouse Award for UC Santa Barbara Outstanding Assistant Professor, and has received grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the MacArthur Foundation. On a personal note, Professor Everett's work with the Haystack MacArthur Digital Media and Learning Competition has proved a direct inspiration and motivation for myself and my colleague Reginald Royston, who you'll hear from later today, as we work with the same program to develop online curriculum in art and American cultures. It is amazing to me how prevalent the universality of subjectivity within the digital culture age can be still in interdisciplinary new media scholarship across fields. Professor Anna Everett's scholarly and personal contributions to the field prove invaluable to remembering the cultural specificity of subjectivity and race in the digital age. She is an incredible force, so it is without further ado that I invite her to kick off our conference today.
When you're on the net, you will stay, 'cause the whole Google Earth is just one click away.
When you're on the net, why would you go outside? Why be out in the world? You could be worldwide.
I'm so out of shape, I'm gonna buy a moo-moo. The skateboard escape from Back to the Future 2 is now on Hulu.
What's this? Maria.
I met a boy! At a bar? At a Jason Mraz concert? No! Online. Online?
Well, how did he find you?
I'm on Twitter, and I'm tweeting, I'm singing a song about tweeting, but it's 7 characters too long.
La 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 la.
I'm on Facebook, and my Facebook updates with my tweets, so I Twitter, and then everybody knows my deets.
La 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 la.
What's Maria doing for dinner then? What you think of Transporter 3? Twitter gets my stats, Facebook gets my tweets, all of them collect on friend feed.
What do you even know about this girl?
I know she likes Jason Mraz.
Oh boy, Tony, you're in trouble.
Why?
You don't know anything about music.
I've got a secret weapon.
Pandora, I just found a site called Pandora. I type in bands I know, it gives me ones like O-A-R. Pandora, I just found a site called Pandora. I'm suddenly equipped like I'm hanging out at hipster bars. Pandora, type it in and there's music playing. Watch the ads and it's almost like paying.
Tony and Maria are going on their date tonight.
Oh, I hope they find true love.
True love on the internet? Ha!
I like to be on eHarmony. Sign up for free on eHarmony. You can get play on eHarmony.
You can't be gay on eHarmony.
Accuracy.
90% of the country.
Why do you guys sound like gaylords?
Come on, we're theater majors.
How could a modern technology hold on to 50s
philosophy. Sorry to preach, but harmony. Never the 21st century.
Maria.
Tony! I was worried you wouldn't show.
Evite, did you get the details? I had you down as not yet replied.
I hate Evite. There's nothing in emails, and you have to click through to the site.
Okay, you guys get the idea. First of all, I really want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful, wonderful collaborative session and or conference, this first encounter, as Greg and Cecil were discussing. I also really want to thank Lori for her assistance, as well as Ashley for that lovely introduction. It was slightly off. I'm no longer chair. I'm director of grad studies now, and I'm no longer working with PMLA. But other than that, everything else is actually true. So thank you for that. So now one issue I have is please remind me when I have 10 minutes left, because I've been trying to cut and cut and cut, and I still don't have it quite as short as it needs to be because of the wonderful audio-visual materials that I want to share with you. So I'm just going to get right to it, and just let me know when I can have a 10-minute warning. So when Cecil Brown contacted me last fall about contributing to a 2012 conference on digital media and diversity, I got excited thinking about all the possible discursive strands I might pursue. When Cecil emailed me in November, the conference's working title was, What About the Rest of Us? 2012 Digital Media and Diversity Conference. So some ideas began percolating around historical exclusions of us. What about all those Black and Latino kids who made video game arcades the multi-million-dollar business model in the 1970s that critic Greg Tate addresses in Mark Derry's Flame Wars? Or J.C. Hertz's Joystick Nation, how video games ate our quarters, won our hearts, and rewired our minds, among others too numerous to name here. When we spoke last February, the working title was Swinging and Flowing Across the Digital Divide, 2012 Digital Media and Diversity Conference. Other sets of concerns quickly arose for me, including how to combat the rhetoric of the digital divide's self-fulfilling prophecy, wherein a lack of investment in proper schools for minority and poor youths results in subpar education that ill prepares them for a global economy, so a vicious cycle occurs. Then, following my conversations with both Greg and Cecil, I learned the conference was now entitled Swinging and Flowing, Inclusion and Diversity in the Age of Big Data, which inspired another analytical arc. These prefatory remarks not only illustrate ways in which this latest iteration of the conference's naming manifests digital technology's ever-changing nature and proliferation across disparate hardware, software systems and platforms, algorithms, source codings, open and proprietary, and more. At the same time, these remarks instantiate fond recollections for me and are offered to situate the hybridized title and organizational structure of my tripartite talk, which is entitled Racing Across the Digital Divide, the Persistence of Race in the Era of Big Data. So my talk addresses three particularly resonant emphases in my own new media and race research and scholarship as they pertain to key issues at the heart of this conference. And I quote our conference program's marching orders. Rather than providing opinions on the questions, the speakers and participants of Swinging and Flowing will expose the current state of awareness about new media, social networks, inclusion, and diversity, so we can't claim later on that we did not know. First, wearing my new media historian hat, I began to ponder some historical erasures in the origin narratives of new media development and dissemination, where African and African diasporic peoples' pioneering contributions to computing and digital media technologies are concerned. You know, the What About Us conference idea. I outlined some of this history in my book, Digital Diaspora, A Race for Cyberspace. However, in keeping with our conference's marching orders, so you cannot claim you did not know, let me briefly summarize and historicize some of Black people's technophilic engagements with new media culture that continue to be put under erasure. For example, many people remain unaware of Dr. Mark Dean and his phenomenal status in the annals of computing history, particularly his significant role in the establishment of the personal computer and its basic architecture. This audience may be aware of him, but generally most remain ignorant of his huge contributions to new media history and big data developments that rock our worlds. And that he led the research and development team that developed the industry standard architecture responsible for creating one of the first 1 gigahertz computer processor chips and the development of the computer keyboard. His team also developed the interior architecture for devices such as modems and printers to be connected to personal computers. Dean led the design team responsible for creating the processor chip that made computers faster and smaller. Most don't know that he holds 3 of IBM's original 9 PC patents. He is the first African American to become an IBM Fellow, the highest level of technical excellence in the company. In 1997, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and Dr. Dean now holds more than 20 patents. Then there is Kenneth J Dunkley. He invented the 3-dimensional viewing glasses, or the 3DVG. His patented invention displays 3D effects from regular 2D photos without any type of lenses, mirrors, or optical elements. By studying human vision, Dunkley discovered that blocking 2 points in a person's peripheral vision causes an ordinary picture to appear in 3-dimensional. His 3DVG blocks out these points. At the Museum of Scientific Discovery in Harrisburg, he conducts visual effects workshops, and Dunkley is also a leader in the field of holography. Dr. Shirley Jackson is the first African-American woman who received a bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degree from MIT, all in the field of physics. Dr. Jackson was selected by the National Science Board to receive its 2007 prestigious Vannevar Bush Award for, quote, a lifetime of achievements in scientific research and education, end quote. Her advances are in telecommunications with Bell Labs. Her inventions while there include developments in the portable fax, touch-tone telephone, solar cell, and fiber optic cables used to provide clarity in overseas telephone calls. She has also helped make possible caller ID and call waiting. Currently, Jackson is the president of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And Valerie Thomas is the inventor of the illusion transmitter. From 1964 to 1995, Thomas worked in a variety of capacities for NASA, where she developed real-time computer data systems, conducted large-scale experiments, and managed various operations, projects, and facilities. While managing a project for NASA's image processing system, Thomas's team spearheaded the development of Landsat, the first satellite to send images from space. In 1976, Thomas worked on concave mirrors to create the illusion of a 3-dimensional object. Thomas began experimenting on an illusion transmitter in 1977, which she patented in 1980. This brilliant innovation placed Thomas among the most prominent black inventors of the 20th century. NASA continues to use her technology and is exploring ways to use it in surgical tools and possibly television and video. And there are many more cases, particularly because African-American pioneers in STEM, R&D, education, and computer technologies are often, as I said, hidden from view. So now you know. And I want to share with you just a few images for you to bear in mind as we go through my presentation, because they will anchor some of the discussion. You'll have some visual accompaniments for them. As my time is short, I'm not going to show this cute little YouTube meme, but I think you guys will be able to find it. So I wanted to just share with you a few quick items. So racing across the digital divide, I'm looking at this, the way in which these spontaneous eruptions occur. So from smart mobs to flash mobs, social media and the viral civil rights movement juggernaut are the things that I'm sort of focusing on as I go through some of the issues that are occurring in African American and other minority communities around new media. But beginning in 1997, the Million Woman March, the Million Mom March, the anti-immigration reform protests, that first wave in 2006, the Gina 6 protests against the racist sentencing laws for black juveniles, that was in 2007, and Obama for America presidential campaign, the Arab Spring uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, the anti-immigration protests second wave, and the Occupy Wall Street movement, and of course now the Million Hoodie March, Justice for Trayvon Martin. So these are just some images to give you a sense of what these movements look like. And I thought the Egypt Supports Wisconsin was quite interesting. And I want to share this clip with you.
Hi, I'm Len Witt, and I'm here with Howard Witt, no relation, and I blog at thepjnet.org, and Howard works for the Chicago Tribune. He broke the Genesis story, and he talks about how important the black blogosphere was in really getting that story out to the public. So here we have a mainstream media guy talking about how he found the power of the blogosphere. So Howard, give us a little background of what happened and how it happened and the role of the Afro-American blogosphere.
I was actually largely ignorant that there even was a black blogosphere until I wrote a story last spring, in the spring of 2007, about a young girl named Shaquanda Cotton. She was a 14-year-old African-American girl in a small town called Paris, Texas, who was sentenced to up to 7 years in prison for having the crime of pushing a hall monitor at her high school. And yet this sentence stood in stark contrast to a sentence for another 14-year-old girl, another white girl, who was sentenced by the same judge to probation for having burned down her family's house. So the contrast in these two situations made for what I thought was an interesting story. When I wrote that story in the Chicago Tribune, I knew it was a good story, but I didn't really expect to get too much reaction to it. And yet within a matter of a couple of days, I started to get hundreds of emails from people who had encountered that story through email, through blogs, through places far removed from the Chicago Tribune's website. And as I started to figure out where these people were encountering the story, I started to realize there was this network of blogs out there devoted to African American issues that were actually distributing that story. The more I read of those blogs, the more I started to realize that, contrary to my assumption, I think, my kind of assumption about blogs being a bunch of kind of narcissistic people who sit in their underwear late at night and expostulate on things, I started to realize that, in fact, these blogs have, particularly in the realm of the black blogs, the Afrosphere, they had some real thoughtful things to say.
Okay. All right, so these are some of the images around the anti-immigration legislation protests. So it kind of anticipates Occupy. And this is the images from the Gina 6. So this is Dr. Mark Dean and Dr. Shirley Jackson that I just told you about. And then, of course, the POTUS, the Afro Geek in Chief, as I like to call him. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about these interesting ways in which the black Twitter birds have proliferated online. And so, actually, I'm going to just move on through this. A little shameless self-plugs here, but I do go into a lot of the issues that I work on in these two works. So I will go to my paper. Okay. So when Cecil asked me to discuss a bit of the history that I just shared with you, I was thrilled. I was thrilled because this history is too often obfuscated from mainstream view. Perhaps during Black History Month, one or another of these or other black scientists or technology innovators will be mentioned. So issues of race, specifically blackness, and technology get communicated in terms of absence, technological lag, or black people and black youth especially become the face of the digital divide, positioned as the ultimate technology outsiders, or the digitally disadvantaged. So with this in mind, I see this conference as yet another validation of my early and ongoing critiques of a sort of post-humanist, post-identity politics euphoria underpinning many debates as the digital humanities movement took shape, but that's another story. And since my current work centers on emergent cultural practices involving social media, youth, politics, participatory democracy, and the digital public sphere, I believe that swinging and flowing suggests a fitting heuristic frame encompassing all of these nodal points of new media culture, digital artistic practices, and social media activism. So looking or having a retrospective gaze back at how earlier historical moments of Black people's technophilic engagements is crucial for putting today's digital democracy activist practices by African American and African diasporic peoples in full context, and thereby resituating this past and present within a continuum of early adoption by Blacks of new media technologies. After all, Black peoples have traditionally embraced and adopted new technologies that might in some way elevate their lives and culture from the specter of slavery's lingering degradations. From this historic Black press to early Black filmmaking to early adoption of the internet as the Million Woman March in 1997, Anita Brown's Taking It information technology to the streets of Washington, D.C. with her Black Geeks Online organization movement, and in the 1990s to the Gina 6 and to the recent Justice for Trayvon Martin movements, as these all clearly attest. So this presentation will continue now in 3 remaining parts, maybe, so let me have to cut one. Part 1 explores some important first steps in Black grassroots political organizing and activism in the early stages of social media. Part 2 considers communities between early forms of revolutionary Black technological innovation in STEM and in digital computing as a postmodern cultural dominant, especially in creative practices and political mobilizing. Part 3 looks at the use value of social media and other big data systems in the everyday lives of Black people. So with Part 1. Now, putting on my new media studies hat, I want to discuss briefly Senator and President Barack Obama and how social media networks and other digital media technologies were leveraged for mobilizing what Pierre Levy terms a collective intelligence of America's young people, including European American, African American, Latino, Latina, and other youths of color, to effect change in their communities and in the nation more broadly. It is the case that politically active youths are often acknowledged for their centrality in President Obama's electoral victory. However, it is also the case that communities of color too often are not given their due when that credit hinges on digital technology mastery and progressive online activist practices. So my remarks and observations address this lacuna somewhat and call attention to Black people's digital mastery and political activism. Appreciating the import of race and ethnicity matters in discussions and analyses of digital media requires a guarded optimism for the beneficial potential of technological innovations in the everyday lives of youth and the larger communities of color. The enthusiasm here is tempered by a recognition of, but not resignation to, undeniable consequences of a persistent inequality in the deep structures of our emergent social media. Companies and their data mining, privacy-eroding imperatives, and the award-winning hit film, The Social Media Network, illustrates all that too perfectly. At the same time, it is difficult not to be optimistic about the myriad ways that youths of color today successfully appropriate digital media tools to speak truth to power, to enliven the promises of a digital democracy, and to retrofit what I have been calling the digital public sphere to suit their own generational concerns and agendas. In 2008, we witnessed that part of the Black activist youth's concerns and agendas which concerned unprecedented involvement with the political process. Combining lessons learned from the 2008 Howard Dean campaign's use of emergent computer networks, tech-minded minority youths and others became engaged in erecting in digital space significant networked communities, akin to what Hakeem Bey would call a temporary autonomous zone, or a TAZ, T-A-Z, or what Nancy Fraser would identify as a computer public sphere, for political organizing on behalf of their chosen candidate. The potent youth-led grassroots movement that have become commonplace today are propelled by these tech-savvy youths that Mark Prinsky has called digital natives. Digital natives who served their candidates well and laid the blueprint for online next-gen campaign management that tech enthusiast Senator Barack Obama took to the next level and then to the White House. Of course, the exemplars noted above represent a microcosm of the much larger and more far-reaching phenomenon of activist engagement with digital technology for both good and ill. So this benefit-threat dialectic, or dualism, is at the crux of my concern with digital media activism at this moment, particularly as it challenges and reinforces troubling identity politics in America as the new millennium ossifies and third and fourth generation IT systems take shape. I'm thinking here particularly of Twitter and its easy co-optation by politicians and other celebrities with axes to grind or agendas to advance. And whether or not we embrace or reject this new information world order from a technophilic perspective or its negating technophobic other, there is no going back to a nostalgic, pre-digital state of political or other public affairs in the US, politics, and in everyday civil society. Of course, the 2010 Supreme Court Citizen United decision does pose a fundamental challenge to much of what the digital democracy movement has accomplished since 2004, to say nothing of the democratizing movements occurring in Tunisia, Egypt, and other African and Middle Eastern nations. Part 2. Social media, microblogging, viral activism, and the where you at generation. The internet revolution, Web 2.0 technologies, and their explosion of online participatory cultures, and the advent of specific social media, including MySpace, now largely superseded, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Flickr, Vimeo, Second Life, and others, have laid the groundwork for rapid transformative social change unmatched by previous media epochs. Powering this emergence of what Jan van Dijk and Manuel Castells and others early on have called the network society are a cadre of tech-obsessed youth of diverse racial and ethnic background who were born digital. In the near decade since their unveiling, social media technologies have enabled these tech-toting youths to reimagine and repurpose traditional communications rules of engagement in our nation's society. With the events leading up to the Jasmine Revolution that we in the West term the Arab Spring, the London riots, the It Gets Better, and the anti-Coney campaigns, the Occupy Wall Street, and most recently Occupy Sanford, Florida, for justice for Trayvon Martin, those movements, we can see the formidable global impact of our changed media environment. At the same time, innovations in mobile telephony have transformed cell phones from the once rarefied status objects of the economic elites to increasingly affordable and essential must-have everyday devices for the masses. Touting such powerful interactive applications and features as web access, SMS, text messaging, online video conferencing, networked mobile gaming, and ubiquitous computing on mobile devices, it becomes evident why the nation became enthralled with the new digital tools, killer apps, and smart toolkits of our networked information culture. Among the most captivating and significant development of the 2.0 order and 3 and 4G convergence cultures is the enthusiastic embrace of social media by the nation's youth and young at heart to affect both serious and frivolous exploits and the numerous tech-driven goals in between. All right. I wanted to just, talk a little bit about the ways in which these new technologies have really given way to some interesting practices. And so I will skip over several things. And then I'm going to go right to part 3, the new racial formation in social media and Black Twitter. What's up with that? So finally, I shift to my new media fangirl hat. In recent years, social media researcher Dana Boyd has argued convincingly that MySpace has become something of a digital ghetto. According to the Inquisitor website's reportage on Dana Boyd's investigations into the decline of MySpace and the ascendance of Facebook, entitled provocatively, Abandon Your MySpace Account for Facebook? You might just be a racist. The online article states further, and I quote, at a keynote speech during New York's Democracy Forum at Lincoln Center, Dana Boyd spoke of the racial disparity and possible reasons for mass abandonment of MySpace for the more cultured and less cheesy social networking site, Facebook. Boyd, a social media researcher for Microsoft and fellow of the Harvard University Berkman Center for Internet and Society, stated, quote, We might as well face an uncomfortable reality. What happened was modern-day white flight. Boyd also observed that the fact that digital migration is revealing the same social patterns as urban white flight should send warning signals to all of us. It should scare the hell out of us, end quote. Referring to MySpace as the ghetto of the digital landscape, Boyd indicated that MySpace users are more likely to be brown or black and espouse a different set of ideals in conflict with those espoused by the teens she surveyed for over 4 years. She said that patterns in migration across social networking sites echoed those of a white exodus from cities in the past. Boyd also said that teens who use Facebook are more likely to condescend to their MySpace-favoring peers. So there are a number of reasons this particular argument is both compelling and not necessarily completely accurate about the major shifts that have occurred in the ascendancy of Facebook and the rapid loss of MySpace as a leading social media service. Many MySpace defectors claimed that the upgrade to the service made the interface too cumbersome, and the majority of complaints that I read about the site concerned the overwhelming number of ads that dominate the screen and the system's features. Still, Boyd's observations are not to be dismissed. Now, swinging back to Black Twitter and its significance, let me flow through a few observations. I will set this up with a mashup of the famous Gil Scott-Heron song, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," synced to an animation of Aaron Magruder's Boondocks cartoon character, Human Freeman, performing the lyrics. Following will be a curious extra normal programmed version featuring the Microsoft computerized voice software. So let me show you that real quickly. So, I'm sorry that this is not going to be available, but so let me move on. So when I got the news then that the legendary musician and poet Gil Scott-Heron had passed away on May 27th, 2011, I was preparing for a conference. Besides recalling fond memories of the one time I met and interviewed him for my radio show, the African Beat at San Jose State University, I read the obits, watched the TV remembrances, but as a result of exploring the mainstream media's fascination with its recent discovery of a very sizable presence of Black people on Twitter, I decided to check in on this site's top trending stories on Gil Scott-Heron. Suffice it to say that the Twitterverse was all a Twitter with tweets that range from solemn profundity, palpable sorrow, and unabashed ignorance to rants against people unfamiliar with Scott-Heron's legacy and relevance. Among the more memorable, representative, and quotable types are, from Charming Jerk, "I'm in class, waiting on my second graders to come in, going to teach them about Gil Scott-Heron and recite some of his poetry to them today." Gucci Stiletto retweets Charming Jerk, and then Nappy Roots writes, "I missed out on seeing Gil Scott-Heron because I was being cheap. I will never let that happen again." Most striking, but hardly surprising of all in the Gil Scott-Heron threads was the tone and tenor of tweets that dismissed fellow tweeters who admitted to being unfamiliar with the artist. Jay Smooth's video blog submitted an entry entitled "The Last Thing I Learned from Gil Scott-Heron." And this not only contextualized the nature of this particular Twitter exchange, but he helped to make sense of some of the long-standing confrontations around the whole Black Twitter phenomenon. What vlogger VJ Smooth revealed was the performative element that motivates many people on Twitter, especially those performing various notions of Blackness and specific Black cultural expressions. Essentially, Smooth points out the tradition of blacker-than-thou performativity stylings that have roots in the Black nationalist era of the 1960s and 70s, and even earlier. So briefly, the debates around Black Twitter came to a fever pitch when Slate.com writer Rorard Manju wrote the provocative essay, How Black People Use Twitter, the latest research on race and microblogging. So on August 10, 2010, it generated a subcategory of expository writing in the mainstream and Black blogospheres about Blacks on Twitter. In trying to understand many and his own obsessions with late-night Black people Twitter, Manju reveals one of the key informants on Black culture. Manju writes, quote, "Black people, specifically young Black people, do seem to use Twitter differently from everyone else on the service. They form tighter clusters on the network, they follow one another more readily, and they retweet each other more often. And more of their posts are @replies directed at other users. This behavior, intentional or not, gives black people, in particular black teenagers, the means to dominate the conversation on Twitter. Now, I'm just going to go to the end of my presentation because there is a real short clip that I think it's really important for us to see despite missing on that one. So on July 6, 2011, another milestone in the significance of social media was reached. President Barack Obama conducted his first live Twitter town hall. I was traveling and missed it. But it underscored a point that I make in Digital Diaspora, and that is that President Obama has been masterful in his use of the internet and other digital technologies to communicate his messages directly to the American and global publics, often as a typical bypass of cable and broadcast television news outlets. So let me conclude with this quote from Gene Youngblood. We understand that like all utopian machines, the internet is exquisitely vulnerable. The real machine is not the internet's technological apparatus, but the conversations it makes possible. So there must be a confrontation. There is a sense in which something or someone does not exist without a presence on the internet. And then hopefully this important clip will show, and you will see why it's important when I play it for you.
We started in Sacramento. We're going to go on this, we're calling it the American Liberty Tour, where we go to 18 cities. We hold presentations like this, educational seminars. We do blogger breakfasts where we connect bloggers in the cities. And then we hold Liberty rallies at night to get people fired up. Right? We just turn over cars, set them on fire. Over 200 years ago, guys, a group of people just like you did something extraordinary. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They were activists, just like you. I truly believe that. They were activists then. We are activists now. Make no distinction about it. So what do? We become digital activists. We identify the medium. We learn the medium. We manipulate the medium. It was printing presses then. It's the internet now. That's where we influence the hearts and minds of our fellow citizens. The Tea Party's got us running up the hills. American majority is trying to give you the tools, the muskets, right? So, here's what I do. I get on Amazon. I type in liberal books. I go through and I say 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. The flip side is you need to go to a conservative, libertarian, whatever, go to their products and give them 5 stars. Okay? So literally, 80% of the books I put a star on, I don't read. So that's how it works. Okay? There's places, this is where your kids, I promise you, this is where your kids are getting information. Rotten Tomatoes, Flickster, those are places where you can rate movies. Okay? So when you type in movies on healthcare or documentaries on healthcare, I don't want Sicko to come up. I don't want Michael Moore's to come up. So I always give it bad ratings. I spend about 30 minutes a day. So that's guerrilla tactics. If there's a place to comment, a place to rate, right, a place to share information, you have to do it. That's how you control the online dialogue. Give our ideals a fighting chance.
Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Warrants a few questions, I believe. Are there any questions that we have for Dr. Everett? Yes, please. And we're a little bit behind time, so in about 5 minutes we're going to end the question session and start with the panel that's following next. Okay? So go ahead.
Hi. I enjoyed your movement from smart mobs to flash mobs, right? Any thoughts on what happened with the the turn of the word flash mob around the Philadelphia teenager riots, or any the bum rushing of department stores for clothing and stuff? Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, too. It is a good question. The idea of the smart mobs was something that is situated within that kind of utopian feeling and ethos around what these social media enable. And what we've seen is generally when minority youths are engaged in something, there's a kind of suspicion. And so it is the case that these youths have found ways to kind of create these spontaneous events. And that's troubling because some of them have been designed around the kind of destructive pranksterisms that have gotten out of control. But the emphasis on, the kinds of important, the smart mobs, as we saw with the Gina 6 and the anti-Sensenbrenner bill, are the ones that didn't get the same kind of coverage. So there's a kind of blanketing of that aspect of the kind of prankster antics that are going on. And I think it really does a disservice to the way in which the majority of youths have been taking up the technology. So I see a kind of, I hate to assume intentionality, but I do see a kind of biased reporting, on those stories in terms of the weight. But again, it's that benefit-threat dialectic I was talking about. There are good things that can happen with it, and there are not so good things that can happen with it, and terrible things that can happen with it. So, but again, underpinning it all is race, issues of race and difference. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, more? Yes, go ahead. The microphone here.
I was really interested in the kind of juxtaposition between that first clip that you showed us of the West Side Story mashup and the clip that we didn't see of the Dancing Baby rendition of Beyonce's Single Ladies video. And, what I'm particularly interested in is the history of that West Side Story and the race politics that played out in the making of those dance numbers, where a lot of the actors were actually asked to play a race that was not their own. And I'm interested if you just have anything to comment on about how these cultural objects are picked up, these historical cultural objects are picked up and reperformed through the internet, and the difference between that reperformance and the ones of more contemporary objects like Beyonce's video.
Wow, that's an interesting question. And I think one of the key things that we can sort of take away, and one of the reasons that I wanted to show that, is to show how our cultural moment right now, remix culture and appropriation are just a part of everyday life, but also to the extent to which these new media technologies infiltrate all aspects of our lives, and how these youths are performing it with such exuberance and glee. And one of the things that I didn't get to say about the Where You At generation, and how I came up with that as a sort of counter to Prinsky's digital natives, is this idea that for young people, having that cell phone and being constantly connected is a part of their DNA, right? And so I was going to a class that was in the evening. I was going to a screening, and as I was approaching the class, it was dark, and all the students came out, and it was during the era of the flip phone. And so they all flipped their phones, and there were these blue lights everywhere. And it reminded me of fireflies in the night, right? And then I realized that there's something really crucial about that, because the first thing they say when they open up their phones is not hello or wait, what's up? It's where you at, right? And then I realized that where you at was not only about a sort of physical location, but it's a where you at in terms of your politics, right? So where are you located? Are you at the, Occupy? So I started to kind of think about the way in which these computer technologies and systems are part of our everyday lives, but also people are used to sort of performing race, and they don't really think that there's a problematic around, racial sort of cross-dressing, right? And there's a kind of sense, on the one hand, that that's good. On the other hand, there are some legacies around performing race and racial tourism, as Lisa Nakamura calls it, that we have to be sort of antsy about. As far as the Beyonce Dancing Baby meme that has spawned all kinds of imitations, and there's even a grown guy with a diaper performing the baby, performing Beyonce. So it's this whole idea of the user-generated content that I didn't get to talk about. But it's just this idea that, technology don't just use us. We use it, to the way that we want, and we have fun with it. And there's something interesting about that that sort of suggests a kind of post-racial attitude in the society and culture. But then again, we get the Trayvon Martins, and we're right back, it's like, okay, we haven't gone quite that far, right? But I think there's some interesting issues there. So thank you for that good question.